Okay, I've got to introduce myself. So, yeah, my name's Sean Beevers. So, I head up the Air Pollution Modelling Group. The main things that we do are associated with policy development and looking at air pollution and health. And also we have this interest in the co-benefits of zero carbon and net zero generally. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so most of this talks about an NIHR study that we're just about finishing up. We haven't quite finished it actually. There's a few months to go, so some of the data's still coming. So these are the research questions. What we wanted to look at was how can the UK public health and economic burden of air pollution be reduced by net zero? So if you implement net zero policies, how do they help improve people's health and the economics of all of that? Can this change the cost-benefit ratios, and can this be influential for policymakers? And what can individuals do to impact to reduce air pollution and also their exposure to it? And the fourth question is being dealt with by Daniela, who I've spotted at the back, who was struggling with her trains earlier, but she's looking at the sort of inequality side of things, so she'll be talking after me. So just quickly, just here, a pointer. So this is how we basically do it. So we start with a model in 2019. We evaluated just to demonstrate that it produces air pollution results that are reasonable and works pretty well. So we have a 2019 sort of base case, if you like. DEFRA are part of our scientific steering group. So DEFRA provided us with some business as usual cases, which is basically all existing sort of air quality policy in the UK. And then on top of that, we implemented some of the net zero scenarios that David's been talking about. And the area that we looked at was were road transport and building heating, basically. That's both domestic and commercial. And then if we went all the way to 2050, there's no business as usual DEFRA scenario in 2050, so we're really going to focus on 2030 and 40 in this talk. And then to calculate the health benefits, you have to go all the way out to 105 years to make sure everyone in your cohort's dead, and then you can work out what the benefits are of your policies. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about we have all the emissions in the model, but I'm going to talk about the ones that we sort of developed. We have a bottom-up emissions inventory for road transport, and by that I mean we have we collect the sort of vehicle flows on individual roads and speeds, mainly from DFT and people like that, but also in London from TfL, and we calculate the emissions for each of the roads and then bulk that up to the sort of country level or in kilometre squares or whatever you need for the model results. And the main things that you need for that are basically sort of vehicle kilometres, how things are going to change from your base case into the future, and also the vehicle fleet. So how many of EVs are forecast from the CCC scenarios. We looked at balanced net zero pathway and widespread innovation. So that table there is sort of very large and comprehensive, but the messages are really clear. So when you look at a normal forecast into the future, the vehicle kilometres, that is the distance travelled by all vehicles, always increases. Nearly all the forecasts are like this. And as you can see from sort of 2030s plus 16%, plus 35% in 2040, and almost 50% increase by 2050. But if you look at the balanced net zero pathways and even the widespread innovation pathways, you see that the vehicle kilometre increases are smaller. This doesn't mean that the vehicle kilometres reduce by 10%. It's actually 10% small. It's 10% smaller than your normal business as usual. So in that sense, you say 16 minus 10, you get a plus 6. But the message is that all of the net zero pathways encourage active travel, modal shift, and all the rest of it, so that you generally get less vehicles. From the EV point of view, again, the business as usual scenarios do have EVs in them, but certainly not of the same ambition as the net zero pathways. So again, in this case, you'd say 18% of electric vehicles in 2030, but if you go for the balanced net zero pathway, you have to add another 22% of vehicles, so you end up there with 40. So that's the way that works. So the message again is it's much more ambitious for electric vehicles.
we've discussed HGVs, and for both in the sort of 30s, there's not a huge amount of change in HGVs away from diesel, and that's partly because of this debate on EV or hydrogen or both maybe. And so, but for all the scenarios, by the time you get to 2050, you're looking at sort of, pretty much an electrified or a fleet that uses hydrogen. So there's a big question on EVs and whether they're actually entirely good. I think we can all agree that exhaust PM's really important. They'll eliminate exhaust PM, they'll eliminate NOx and NO2, associated VOCs, which are quite important, and of course they're more efficient, and if you use a sustainable source of electricity, as David went through, they're good for CO2 generally. But they're heavier than the ICE equivalent, so a petrol or diesel equivalent, so the increased tyre wear, road wear, resuspension, and so there's a sort of a bit of a trade-off there, and there's various sort of papers you can read on that. But one thing that we wanted to study was whether this is counteracted by the use of regenerative braking. And so William Hicks has recently published a paper on this. And what we did, we worked with our collaborators, which were Bosch in Germany, and looked at an ICE vehicle, a petrol or diesel vehicle driving over a cycle, and the equivalent vehicle, electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, and looked at the amount of brake power that they used. And what the resultant was that actually the reduction in brake wear PM emissions was really quite large. So it was between 64 and 95%. So this counteracts this increase in other sources of PM, and we think that overall PM 2.5 for an electric vehicle compared with an ICE equivalent is about 30% less polluting. In London, ironically, in cities it's slightly, it usually brakes less effectively, and so the benefits for regenerative braking are less, and so in London it's only 24%, and if you're on a motorway where brakes don't really get used all that much at all, so they're not quite as important. It's on the margins of whether it's a benefit or not. So around the M25 it was just a few percent lower. And you can see this on this table on the bottom right here. There's the business as usual emissions for NOx, NO2, PM10 and PM2.5. You can see this quite large drop, so the existing policies for air pollution are good. But you can also see that if you continue with the electrification of the vehicle fleet, it really starts to eliminate NOx and NO2 altogether. But there's a slightly different story for PM. In the business as usual scenarios, there's an initial reduction, but actually by 2014, this is because of the vehicle kilometre increases predominantly, it actually goes back up. So there's not much benefit at all. And so, but you can see that there is a benefit for electric vehicles. So again, useful for PM. The other thing that we looked at was building emissions, and again we looked at the balanced net zero pathway. And this is basically behaviour change and energy efficiency measures. So that's basically insulating your homes, mainly in preparation for installing low carbon heating. There's some low carbon district heating networks that are part of the actual scheme. But the big ticket item really is, as we've discussed, is heat pumps. And one of the things that I guess strikes you, this is obviously really busy, this table, but the take-home message here is just the very, very large numbers of houses that have to either have insulation applied to them or purchase a heat pump. The scale of the transition is really very large indeed. So that's what strikes you about the whole of this building, this area for net zero in buildings. Is it worth it for air pollution? Well, the biggest single PM2.5 emission source in the UK, according to the NAI, is from buildings. It's not from road transport. And also increasingly as other parts of the economy start to reduce their NOx emissions, then buildings start to become important for NOx as well. So yes, the scale of net zero transition is very large, but also it's an important source to tackle really. And of course we've heard about fairness and support for people in this transition. I think this is going to be, this kind of emphasises how critical all of that is really. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the models that we use. Like I said, we have all emissions in our models. We use European emissions. We use UK emissions because some of the pollutants that we're talking about, PM and ozone and so on, have a long range transport, so that the emissions that are around us, not just in our country or not just in our city, are really important too. So you have to have quite a large scope for a model. We use boundary conditions for outside of the area where we have the emissions themselves, and it's called we use a chemical transport model. So it's a model that tries to mimic the physics and chemistry of the atmosphere. They're highly complex models. They use lots and lots of computers. They're driven by meteorology, not surprisingly, and also the meteorology changes through time. So we not only use anthropogenic emissions, but we also use biogenic emissions. Biogenic emissions, particularly organic aerosols from trees and those sorts of things, are actually quite important going forward. And this at the end gives you the sort of typical outputs that we have. Connected to that, we're increasingly using an indoor model, so we use the outdoor air pollution predictions that we can create for individual years, be they future scenarios or whatever. So that they obviously contribute to the indoor environment. We use different housing characteristics, of course, that's really important for your indoor environment. There are increasing amounts of measurements we have a project called Wellhome which we use. And we have a survey as well of behaviour, so we know a little bit more about where people spend their time in their homes, what sort of sources they have within their homes. And so this is our indoor model, and it's based around CONTAM, which is a US NIST model. So here's some of the results that we've got. So on here we've got 2019 nitrogen dioxide. And as you can see, there's a real range of results from really quite low concentrations in Scotland, in the north of Scotland, and they generally increase as you go down to the southeast, and of course you can spot the cities where things are the worst. If you look at the difference between 2030 and 2019, this is from the business as usual, so this is from existing air quality policy. Not surprisingly, you get some significant benefits for NO2, so that's the transition to cleaner vehicles generally speaking. But also if you look at the 2030 with the addition of the BNZP, you carry on with that benefit. So implementing electric vehicles into the fleet is really quite important. As I say, it goes on to 2042. So if you look at the little box here, this is kind of like a cutout for this area, and this is Liverpool, sort of Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield and the surroundings, just so you can get your bearings. And if you look at 2019, you compare that with the BNZP in 2040, you can see almost an elimination of NO2 as an issue. And these blobs that you can see here, that's Manchester Airport, that's I think that's John Lennon Airport, and this is shipping, we think, and central Liverpool. So there are still some issues related to NO2, but you can see the really significant benefits of EVs. So if you do the same for PM 2.5, again there's a big range. So PM up in the north of Scotland is really quite low already, but obviously increases as you go down towards the southeast. And the difference, again, the business as usual does have a benefit. You get in 2-3 micrograms improvement between 2019 and 2030. And the problem that when we looked at 2030 and 2040, it kind of runs out of steam. So 2040 is almost the same as 2030. So the PM 2.5 trend flattens out. So this is where the benefits of decarbonising buildings comes in, because that takes time to ramp up, and so you get this additional benefit for those policies, net zero policies, and you get a considerable amount of increased reduction of PM. And again, using that cutout, you can see the difference between 2019, where you're getting sort of 10-11 micrograms in cities, and that drops down to about 8 within the cities, and certainly down to sort of 4 or 5 outside of cities. So you can see there's a significant increase improvement of air quality as we go forward and using net zero. Indoors, so we haven't got the equivalent of a kind of UK indoor model. So what we did here is we took a sort of typical mid-terrace house for London. It represents about 1.5 million homes in London. We have this survey of where people spend their time, so we know that people spend times in different rooms and so on. So we make a forecast for each of these rooms under different scenarios, and what we wanted to do was to look at what would happen if you took gas out of your home, so basically gas cooking. We evaluated the model against measurements, and then we've produced this. So this is the outdoor air, so this is from the model I've just spoken about. This is the concentrations in your home, and if you have essentially no sources in your house like gas, you can see that actually your home's protective. You end up with lower concentrations in your house. But as soon as you switch gas on, then you get quite a large increase in PM 2.5 and a large increase in NO2 too. So what could you do about that? You can ventilate your home a little bit better. So you open the windows all the time, and you can see that there's a benefit for PM 2.5, so it drops from 12.7 to 9.8, but not so much from NO2 because that draws NO2 from outdoors in, so there's a trade-off there. So it seems the best thing you can do is actually ventilate your house when you're actually cooking, not surprisingly. And that seems to have the sort of benefit for PM 2.5, but doesn't include too much NO2 indoors. So so that's our kind of recommendation for households. So how does this all transpire to health impacts and active travel? So just a quick bit on the methodology. We've calculated mortality of air pollution. We have calculated morbidity. There's more to come. I'm just going to show you some examples. We've got a whole list of morbidity sort of outcomes here, which I'm only going to present some. They use basically COMIAP recommendations where they're relevant for NO2 and for PM 2.5, WHO recommendations for ozone. We calculate this stuff at ward and local authority level. For morbidity, again, much the same. So we use COMIAP and WHO recommendations for these calculations. And we've also calculated physical activity using sort of Met hours per week, and that's from a paper by Kelly. So it's sometimes hard to actually present health impacts. So we've chosen to use UK life expectancy because it seems fairly understandable, at least to us anyway. So it'd be interesting to see what other people think, I guess. But if you kept 2019 air pollution concentrations the same, we're already paying for all of this. So you lose about almost 8 months of your life expectancy. So there's a big cost to not tackling air pollution. The business as usual scenarios that we've run, so that's looking at our future forecasts up to 2040 and then going out to for 105 years, that reduces that down to 5.9 months. So it's a significant benefit. And if you look at BNZP as well, you get an additional benefit. So by introducing BAU scenarios and BNZP scenarios, you get into 2 to 2.5 months of your life for the entire population. So, and this is based on a cohort of children born in 2019 going forward. So a really significant improvement in mortality. Morbidity, so this is just a few examples. There was a great list, as you saw. So these are just COPD, ischemic heart disease and lung cancer. And again, if you keep your air pollution at 2019 concentrations, you end up with 3.2 million, 600,000 and 800,000 COPD, ischemic heart disease and lung cancer cases from these calculations. So if you introduce, again, the business as usual scenarios to tackle air pollution, these are the cases that you avoid. So significant numbers of cases being avoided. And again, if you add on top of that your BNZP, again, you're getting 210,000, 39,000 and 52,000 less cases for that scenario as well. So the big impacts of morbidity. Traditionally, mortality used to be the most important, but increasingly morbidity is becoming a significant part of the overall health burden. So then we looked at active travel, and this is for a commuters cohort of both walkers and cyclists. We looked at them from age of 20 and followed them through their lives. And based on keeping the sort of levels of walking and cycling remaining unchanged in 2019. If you undertake the kind of walking and cycling that typically these commuters do, you get about 5.5 months of life expectancy improvement, basically. We noticed that within the 2030 and 2040 business as usual cases, that didn't really change, so there wasn't any more or less walking or cycling. But what is apparent in the BNZP, and in particular for the widespread innovation scenario, there's really quite large increases. Not so much of walking, they're relatively modest. In 2030 it's plus 5%, 2040 is 0.75%. But actually there's factors of 3, nearly 5, and then all the way up to nearly 7 increase in cycling. And a lot of this is to do with this, particularly in the widespread innovation scenario of e-bike uptake and other e-solutions, I think. So it's really important. So if you're involved in active travel, it's really good for you. And some of these CCC scenarios are really key to, or their aims really are to improve this and increase it quite a lot. So the economic impacts, we're not really finished with this. Like I said, there's only a few months left, so I can only tell you a little bit about this. This is actually from the CCC, so David would have recognised this. So this is the timeline between sort of present day and 2050. These are the costs of implementing the policy, and these are the benefits. So these are the savings that you get. And this is transport, and that's homes. And transport, it seems pretty clear to the CCC from this analysis that it's really beneficial. You know, you get there's an initial cost, but then soon thereafter you actually get a benefit each year. So in of itself, it's a cost-effective thing to do, and it's a good thing to do, right? So, but the homes aspect of it, so fitting heat pumps, improving insulation, and so on, it's much less clear financially, at least, why you would do that, because the costs are higher and the benefits are slightly lower. But if you've taken these two together, again, it's certainly a beneficial thing to do in combination, but that may not be the entire argument. So, but if you look at but neither of these actually include health benefits of air pollution at all. So I mean, there's an additional benefit that we could we're hoping to add on, and we're hoping that might be influential. So by 2050, if you look at the mortality impacts of the BNZP, you get 4.2 billion pounds saved at 2050. So if you can see the benefits here for households, about 3 billion, you can see that they're really quite significant additional benefits. And when you think about the fact that this is only mortality, we haven't added morbidity or active travel, we don't know how to do the health impacts of indoor air pollution, but they seem significant as well. And there are other net zero impacts. You can see that the air pollution aspects of health could be a really important contributor to this debate about the economics of net zero policy, which ultimately is what we set out to sort of demonstrate, I think. So in conclusion then, NO2 is going to be reduced by existing air quality policy, improvement in vehicle technology and the like. If you keep air pollution at its current level, which is a good job, because if you keep it at its current levels, you lose about 8 months of your life expectancy. But that this business as usual scenario is effective, so you go down to about 5.9 months. But we think there are further benefits of NO2 that go beyond the sort of existing standards for vehicles. We think that even though there are some problems associated with non-exhaust emissions of PM from electric vehicles, overall we think they're beneficial still because of braking from PM 2.5 to from 2030 to 2040, we've seen that that's actually quite small. So in addition to electric vehicle benefits, we've got low carbon domestic heating benefits as that ramps up. So fitting heat pumps, improving insulation in homes is really important. And all those in combination give you an extra 2.5 months, give everyone an extra 2.5 months of their lives. Obviously this could be focused in specific population subgroups, so they get a huge, much more, but right away across the population. Active travel, which is all part of the net zero story, gives you about 5.5 months for people who do it. So again, it's a really important thing, and should be encouraged. Indoors, which is not sort of often associated with all of this. Obviously, if you don't have an indoor gas source, your house is actually protective, and if you increase your insulation, if you make it slightly airtighter as a consequence of that would be a benefit. But if you do have a source indoors, obviously that makes it worse, so there's a trade-off there. But if you're removing gas sources, which you would potentially do if you were fitting a heat pump, that's really beneficial for PM 2.5 and for NO2. And if you do have sources indoors, a general ventilation sort of approach would be to ventilate while you're doing it, because you can't ventilate all the time, really. Behaviour and setting are really important, obviously, for that, so it does vary greatly. We can't assess indoor health, so we need to add that into the equation, and that's a sort of research area that needs to be done. And so our costs that are associated with all this, which seem significant compared with the savings that the CCC already have for some of these net zero policies, are going to be significant, but also probably underestimated. So we think we can do a little bit better there. Fairness engagement, it's been spoken about before, is really important. So actually taking the public with us, we're hoping that some of these arguments can be made to the public for this sort of more, a sort of demonstrating what the future could hold, and sort of hoping that we can encourage people along that path. And really, the last thing to say was that we've only had added traffic and building heating, but of course there's lots of other net zero policies that need to be added to all of these forecasts to get the sort of complete story, if you like, of net zero. So that's where I'm going to finish. So thank you very much.